You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. There are lots of ways to go hunting, right? Yeah, sure. Guns, traps, all sorts of things. Did you know you can hunt with a bird? You can hunt birds with a bird of prey. We're going to talk falconry today with Robert McGuire and Dr. Harvey Leslie here on the podcast.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, falconing with some falconers. Dr. Harvey Leslie, Robert McGuire. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. And thanks for bringing a special guest who's perched over here over your left shoulder. Who is that?
This is Peregrine. Tiercel means male. And I call him Toby, but Toby is Choctaw for pale.
Okay.
He's a tundra peregrine. And when you trap them in their first year, they're not real dark brown. They're more blonde colored.
Okay.
So I named him Toby, which is Tohbi, which is Choctaw for blonde.
Very cool. Very cool.
They migrate through Mississippi they're one of the few peregrines that migrate from Alaska, Canada, Greenland. They come right down through the Mississippi River Valley and then down all the way to South America.
Really cool. All right. We're going to learn more about him. And first, I want to know more about y'all. So, Dr. Leslie, you born and raised in Oxford.
Right.
Right. And a lot of people from Oxford are going to recognize your name. Of course,
right. Your
dad was the mayor there in Oxford for how long?
24 years.
All right. So growing up, how do you go from mayor's son growing up in Oxford to falconer?
Well, when I was at Ole Miss, they allowed students to go up in the stacks to study. And I was studying organic chemistry, which is a really tough course and somewhat boring at times. And I was up in the stacks and I'd get tired and just take a break. And I happened to be in front of a bunch of reference books that were on falconry. And one was from 1921 and it had a picture of a falcon like this with a bird dog sitting right beside it.
Okay.
And I said, that is the coolest thing. And I started investigating it and found out of a falconer in Memphis.
Okay.
And he kind of took me under his wing, and that's how I got involved. And I haven't done it continually, but I've done it off and on for like 40 years.
Okay. And Robert, how'd you get to know him and kind of get hooked up on this?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Our mutual friend that kind of got him started in falconry. Mine was a little different. My first cousin, who lived in California at the time, was a falconer. He was the youngest falconer in California at the time. This was back in the early 70s. And I had gone to visit him, and that's kind of how I got into it. But Harvey, Dave Vance, the gentleman he's talking about, lived in Memphis. And I remember writing a letter to a well-known falconer, Hal Webster, that was from Colorado at the time, asking that were there any local falconers in Mississippi that I could hook up with. And he got me, I got the letter back then. It was no email. It was just you mailed a letter and had to wait. So it was probably about 2 weeks later, okay, I get a letter from Hal saying, well, there's a gentleman in Memphis named Dave Vance, and that's how I ended up getting in contact with Harvey.
Okay. And you grew up where?
In Kosciuszko,
okay,
in Natala County. Born and raised, worked 40 years with the Postal Service.
Okay.
I was a mailman for all that time.
How about that?
Yeah.
And all the while, y'all have got professional careers, but your hobby is hunting. Am I right? It's
That's
hunting,
right, yes.
but with a falcon.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
we both started out with hawks. Red tails, and then
Okay.
later Harris hawks, where you would hunt squirrels and rabbits. But Dave Vance, who we mentioned earlier, had a friend in Thayer, Missouri, that had peregrine falcons. And he flew 2 peregrines at the same time at dove, and he would catch 3 to 5 dove in the afternoon.
Oh, wow.
And we were invited to go up and watch. And from that point on, all we wanted to do was fly falcons. We didn't care about flying rabbits or squirrels. And that's how we really got into flying. They distinguish it. A hawk is called a short wing because his wings are rounded and short. And a falcon is called a long wing because their wings are so long and pointed.
Okay.
So we became fascinated with only flying long wings. And so what we fly is ducks. We catch ducks with these birds.
Right.
With these birds, you duck hunt.
That's
it.
right.
Okay. And now this may be a novice question. Does it require a hunting license?
It does require a hunting license, and you got to
State
have
and federal duck stamp.
and you got to have a state duck stamp. You got to
Same
have,
as if you're shooting a gun at them.
you got to
Same
have
thing. No
the
distinction.
sportsman's license or the whatever the state requires.
But you also have to have a falconry permit too.
Okay.
That's the other caveat.
So a falconry permit. Earlier I said falconing. Did I get it wrong? It's falconry.
That's
Falconry,
right.
yes.
Okay. So how do you go about getting a falconry permit?
Well, you go through the Mississippi Department of Wildlife and talk to Houston Havens. He's our falconry administrator, a fine fella, I think, a lot of Houston. In fact, I've hunted on Houston's dad's property, their property around West Mississippi. And but you have to study for a test. I think it's 100 questions, multiple choice, that has to do with the disease, health, hunting. All the different.
You have to be able to identify the different types of birds of prey.
And equipment that you use and hunting techniques and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and let me say too, for the people that are listening and can't see it, those aren't jingle bells. Okay, we're gonna have to make sure we don't air this one around Christmas, or some kid's gonna think Santa Claus is about to land on the house. It's not jingle bells, but that is Toby, who's got bells on his ankle over there that you're hearing.
That's correct. When they're flying, you let them go, and they go up. Now, sometimes they don't go up right away. Sometimes they may go 1/4 mile away from you before they start climbing, but you train them to go high above you, and they're supposed to be watching you so that when you flush the ducks or whatever bird you're flushing, that they dive down, and when they dive down, they're doing anywhere from 150 to 200 miles an hour.
Really?
Really.
It's the fastest bird on the planet, the peregrine falcon.
That's it. That's the
It's
Ferrari.
hard to even imagine.
Yeah. Well, the point about the bells, though, is when they're up high, a lot of times you don't know quite where they are. They're easy to lose in the light, and they'll get anywhere from 500-600 feet to 1,000 or more.
Yeah, you can't see them.
And they'll be at the edge of your vision. And sometimes the bells help me to know, well, if he's within earshot, I don't have to know exactly where he is. I just flush. And then what you do is you watch the ducks, because as the ducks leave, he's going to come into view.
Okay.
If you're trying to find him at 200 miles an hour, you'll miss it.
Yeah. I guess it's almost like, is it one of those, if especially if it's not straight down, but if it's at an angle that fast, you might hear him before you can see him.
Oh, that's
you
true.
will hear him.
If you're
You
following
will
the
hear him
sound.
coming. And when they're really high,
Sounds like a jet fighter.
Yeah.
like when Robert's bird gets really high, it sounds like bacon sizzling in a
That's
griddle.
it. Yeah.
It sounds like the air is being ripped.
And when
as
they
come
impact the
down.
duck, they'll hit it with their feet. Sounds like hitting a baseball,
Really?
Just a
Sounds
whack.
like a lick on the football
That's
field.
it. That's
Okay.
it. Yeah.
And so when he hits the duck, does the duck fall just like that? And
I've seen ducks get hit so hard they'll be cartwheeling through the air, and then they'll hit the ground, bounce off the ground.
But
Yeah.
not always.
Not
Sometimes
always.
they'll break
Bind
the wing,
to it, yeah.
or they have an interesting trait. I don't know if he'll be still enough. their beak is not, it's sharp on the end, but if you look closely right behind that, there's a little notch.
Okay.
And what they do is if the bird that they've selected isn't dead, when they get it on the ground with it, they'll reach down with that notch and grab the cervical vertebra and just break their neck.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
It's a characteristic of all falcons to have that.
They just-
the tomial tooth. It's notch,
tomial tooth
Okay.
is what it's called. And their physiology is quite different than hawks as well. Their nostrils,
Baffled.
it's baffled. It's a hole with a little bony insert. And what that does is it allows the air, when they're doing 200 miles an hour, not to be forced
still
in
breathe.
and blow
Still
up their
breathe.
lungs. It has the right amount of pressure that they can still breathe when they're diving.
What an amazing.
And their eyes have two fovea. We have one, or macula. We in human physiology we call it a macula, but they have two, and the one is for normal vision, like us, like where you're most concentrated when you read. But then they can switch to the other one, and it's like us looking through 7-power binoculars.
Really? 7
Really?
power.
Yeah, and they can adjust that from close to far away. Yeah.
So you're listening. He's out of sight because he's so high up there. He sees you clearly.
Oh, clearly.
Yeah.
But
And the main thing, you want him to see the ducks clearly.
right. But now, through modern technology, that piece of equipment, the bells, have been in existence for, as long as falconry recorded history, which is well over 3,000, maybe 4,000 that we know that falconry existed. It was very popular during the Middle Ages. Henry VIII was an avid falconer. We were talking about that coming down. Frederick II, King Frederick II, the
Yeah, he was
Roman
Holy Roman Emperor.
Holy
in
Roman Emperor.
the 1200s.
Okay.
And
He wrote the first book on falcon.
on falconry.
Okay. And
But the bells have been around a long time. That's how you located your bird. If they came up missing, you listened to the sound. But now after that, there was radio telemetry.
okay.
So, we had the receiver and a transmitter, but now we have GPS, and thank God for GPS.
You can put the transmitter on the bird,
Okay.
pull up the app on your phone, and you can just sit there
Watch where you
Like
go.
and know where he's
navigation in
going.
your
You can
car.
say, okay, he's leaving. I better do something to get him back this way. Or you can say, well, he's right overhead. I don't see him, but I know he's up there.
It helps you make better decisions,
And-
like
and,
with flushing. Now, you always had to do this, to kind of know where the bird was before you went in to flush the game.
Like what he was
ducks.
talking about a
Yeah.
minute ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said put the transmitter on the bird. What is that process? So it's not like our dog, where you get one.
No, it's real
implanted.
easy. You take everything that you see on him except for the bells and that anklet. All of this stuff
Removed.
comes off. So when
Okay.
you fly him loose, he can't get tangled in anything.
Right.
And then once you take that off, you've got that hole there for the anklet, and you just put a zip tie through the transmitter and
tie it on there.
just tie it on there.
Okay.
There's
And then
other
when you're
methods,
through, you just
too,
cut
but-
it off.
Okay.
And sometimes they put like a little harness, a backpack on them, and it sits on the
there are different
middle
ways
of
to
their
attach
back.
it.
It's a little bit more complicated to do that. I've got them, but I don't use it. Just simple to just put it on that anklet.
So y'all talked about training. Okay. And so we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years ago, these various kings were training a falcon. That to me is fascinating, especially you think about, okay, who was the first person to catch one and decide, I'm going to train this thing?
Right.
But the process of training one, how does that
Well, if
begin?
you can feed an animal, you can train it. So
Okay.
that's part of it. And in years past, they would trap a bird or take it from the nest, and then they would feed it And when it was time to start training, they would cut down its rations. And what we do is we have a scale that we weigh the bird. So we know when they're too fat or when they're too lean, and they've got to be right in that, playing weight, where they're hungry enough to fly, but they're fit enough to perform. And so the way they would train them is you would put it on a perch like this, and you have a little leather lure with meat attached. And once you've got it where it'll eat from the fist, then you just unhood it and throw the lure down maybe 10 feet away. And when it'll fly immediately and eat off the lure, you're on your way. Then all you've got to do is go to 10 yards, 20 yards, and then eventually you turn it loose. And when you turn it loose, it ends up making a circle, like, where is the lure? And then you throw it down. And the original idea was to hide the lure for longer and longer periods of time so the bird would go up high. And then you use pigeons, because they can't catch a pigeon in level flight. They can catch a pigeon easily if they're high, but if they're level, they can't catch it. So when the bird is low, you'd throw out a pigeon that you knew it couldn't catch, and it would chase it around. And the idea was it would come back higher, and you'd throw that lure out. And eventually a light goes on, and they go, oh, I've got to be high to get rewarded. But nowadays, I'll let Robert do that about the drone.
Oh yeah, we use drones to it's
the radio the GPS telemetry
GPS.
And the drone have changed everything.
We used helium balloons and kites, and now we use drones. We take it up to, you can only legally go up to 400 feet. So if they're going up 400 feet, we have this arrangement where there's a tube with a line, and there's a parachute that goes up in the tube, and there's a little release clip that's on the like a drapery ring, plastic drape, in the middle of that parachute that goes through the tube that's clipped to a little release that holds it in place. And then you've got a line coming down that's attached to the parachute,
and then you've
with
got
the bait. The bait.
And you train the bird
to go up.
Go up, and it'll grab the bait, pull the parachute so it won't fly off.
It does not pull the drone because it releases.
It releases.
Yeah.
And so once you've got them going high, then
you wait them out, and they'll go higher.
Then you just start flushing ducks for
That's
them.
It.
Then sort of the natural instinct probably kicks in.
Once they kill a duck or two, they know what's going on. And you can have a lot of fidelity with what they're going to do. Right. As long as their weight is just about right, you can let them go, and you don't really care how far they go away from you, but they're going to end up above your head watching you, and when you flush the ducks, here they come.
I think he coined probably some great dating advice out of that lesson too. And he said, if you can feed an animal, you can train it.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
A bunch of us animals have had that experience.
Right. But the flip side of that analogy is this is more like an unrequited love. The girl that will never like you because they still bite you. They'll still foot you. They're not a pet.
Right. It's a wild creature.
And you're their servant. You're, please, will you catch this duck? Please, it's quite the opposite of dating someone who likes.
It's not as easy, to sit here and talk about. To make all this happen is a lot of work and effort.
It sounds like a lot.
And there's so many things that can go wrong,
especially with falcons, long wings. You have to have the area, open country to do it. It's not like a hawk. You go to a little field and woods, and you're hunting squirrels or rabbits. And this is a different ball game to train and hunt with these, and it requires a little bit higher skill level to do it.
You've got to have the land,
and that's paramount.
We're just lucky that we have permission on.
Yeah.
2 cattle farms, his in Baden and mine in Grenada, that's really, really open with small ponds. That's the other trick. When you're hunting ducks, you can't hunt on a flooded rice field.
Right.
No.
Because what will happen is as the falcon starts down, the duck will flush, but it'll keep the water between the duck and the falcon. And so when the falcon gets close, it'll just dump back in the water. And once it's on the water, the falcon can't catch it. It's got to hit it in the air. And so it's got to be a small enough pond that you can convince them by yelling and hollering that they will leave the pond and fly over land trying to get to the next pond.
Okay.
That's the only little window that they're
That's why you
vulnerable.
want that falcon really high, so that when the ducks leave, they feel safe, confident that they're going to get away. But usually it doesn't work.
Didn't work. Yeah. Chip, you had a question?
Yeah, I was curious. After the falcon hits the duck, how do you retrieve it? The falcon doesn't bring it to you, does
No.
it?
No, it lands on it.
And it's going to be wherever the duck ends up. And and that's a good thing, because one of the problems with falconry is if your falcon is catching a bird that's really small, like dove, like I mentioned earlier, they could pick that dove up and carry it in a tree and eat the whole dove, and then they may not come back to you. So
Because they're full.
Because they're full. So that's one of the reasons we like flying ducks, is they can't fly very far, and if it's a mallard, not at all.
Nowhere.
With a duck. So wherever they end up, that's where you're going to pick them
Where
up.
they knock the duck down, or they come in and bind to it and take it to the ground, is where they're going to.
They're going to be right there.
And what we refer to as making into the bird, the falcon, the hawk. You just approach and make in, and then you either let it eat some of the duck or the prey, and then you coax it onto the lure and then the glove, and you're done for the next. And you can control how much you feed it so that they're ready for the next day. Yeah.
So, follow-up question: Have you ever been hunting with a falcon and a dog at the same time? That sounds like maximum efficiency.
Yeah.
He does.
Really?
He's got a lab. Yeah.
I have a lab that helps with the flushing, but years ago I had a setter, because I also gun hunted, and Robert and I were hunting at his place, and there was a mixed flock of ducks. There were teal and mallards, and I can't remember what else. But anyway, we flushed some ducks, and the falcon went behind the levee, so in diving down, and we couldn't see where it went. So we go running around the pond, and the falcon's flying around about 10 feet off the ground. But it was tall grass, waist-high grass. And so some of the ducks came back to the pond. So we just waited, and the falcon went back up, and sure enough, we flushed some more ducks, and she killed a mallard. But after the flight, I kept saying, Robert, I got the setter in the car. I believe she must have hit a duck on that first flight. So we got the setter out, went down in that grass, and sure enough, it pointed the teal and then reached in and retrieved it.
How about that?
Yeah. So if you're out west hunting upland game, that's the way they do it with the pointing dog. And a matter of fact, pointing dogs were developed for this,
right?
Not for gun hunting.
Really? Okay.
And it was only during the 1800s that they adapted them to gun hunting. The idea was when the dog points, you put the falcon up, and then a lot of times you'd have a spaniel or a lab to do the flushing, and then the falcon would, hit them out of the air.
Out of the air. How do you mentioned it, they migrate through, you capture one. How do you get a falcon?
Well, there's a couple of techniques, but they come through Mississippi. We trap them right here in Mississippi.
Okay.
And you have to use a pigeon, and it's kind of it's a little like a fisherman in his secret fishing hole. That's one of the things we.
What was your experience like the first time you did that on your own?
it was exhilarating and awesome to be able to do that. And also, I'm a bander, and I work with the Padre Peregrine Falcon survey team, and every fall we trap and band migratory peregrines. And
He traps about 35 every fall
Okay, every fall.
I've trapped quite a few of them over the years.
That's really cool.
and bands them and releases.
Yeah. So, but it's pretty exciting, for that wild bird to come in and to capture it, and then to do what we do with them.
Mm-hmm.
And we can only take first year birds, juveniles.
You can't take this
can't
bird
take
is
an
in
adult
mature
out of the wild.
plumage, but a juvenile would have vertical stripes on its breast and would be brown, not blue. This one's
And the
kinda
reason
blue.
for that is the adults have proven they've survived, and they're
Don't
breeders,
affect the population.
Right.
And
okay.
and sadly, juvenile peregrines have about a 70% or more mortality rate in their first year.
If they don't learn to hunt quickly,
And imagine for these peregrines, they're traveling. These are tundrous, tundra peregrines, and so they're coming from the far north in the Arctic, and so for them, it's a round trip migration of like 14,000 miles. They'll go all the way down into Chile and Argentina, or Ecuador, South America,
and then come back in the spring.
in the spring.
Come back through.
But
the
if
spring.
if they don't learn those skills that are necessary to survive, they're not going to make it. So imagine leaving the Arctic. A lot of these birds, I trap them on Padre with down still on their head. They probably had left the Arctic 2 weeks before.
Wow.
And then they make it down this far. They've done good to make it to Mississippi or Texas or wherever. And but they got a long way yet to go.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, a lot of falconers would take birds from the nest, but they end up being stunted behaviorally. They never learn that once you start feeding them, they become dependent on you, and they can become imprinted, and their behavior as an imprint is horrible. They think of you as a falcon, or you as their brother or sister trying to rob their food, and it's terrible. So these birds that are trapped out of the wild are mature enough. They're still young, like he said, first year bird, but they're mature enough to know that death's tapped them on the shoulder a time or two, and they missed a meal or two, and they just stay tightly together. They're calm, and they're so much easier to handle.
Y'all mentioned how intense, difficult the training process can be. It's not easy.
No.
It takes experience. You said a lot can go wrong. You ever had any experiences during training when something goes wrong and do you lose a bird? Or
we've both lost birds in the past, and like we were describing the parachute that comes off the drone. Well, you can be out there in the early training stages, and the bird's going up and grabbing the bait, and all that's fine. Well, you go out one day and the wind's maybe not the right direction you want, or it's a little too heavy a wind, and all of a sudden you landed the drone, you look up and your bird's drifting or will end up in the trees, and now you've got a nightmare. Or there've been all kinds of times, even when you catch a duck, the falcon will hit the duck and it'll manage to get back in the water, or
it sees something else off in the distance.
It'll
and
take off.
It's gone.
It'll fly after it. That's another thing. You have no control over what duck it's going to hit. And a lot of times it's a merganser. Nobody eats mergansers. They eat fish, and you open them up, they smell like fish.
Right.
The falcon doesn't care, but if it's a wood duck, I might save the breast for dinner. But there are a lot that can go wrong.
Okay.
The dog can run in when he's not supposed to.
But am I right that, like in a lot of other things, that risk of things that could go wrong kind of makes the victories when it goes right that much sweeter, that much more exciting?
True.
Yeah.
That's true. And I've often thought when he talked about 70% mortality of the immature birds, I've often thought about taking this bird to football practice and say, you know, guys, if you miss a tackle, are you going to get fed a steak after the game? Or if you throw an interception, are you going to have a place to sleep? These birds, if they miss, they don't eat.
That's right.
And if they don't eat for 3 or 4 days,
Right.
You get weak.
it's a problem.
Right. You know, probably the great lesson there for college kids would be, this is what the real world is like. Okay, we're out here. If the bacon doesn't come home or paycheck doesn't come home, there's no coach or training table waiting to feed me.
That is
That's
exactly
exactly
right.
You earn your keep. You
You're
know,
right.
That's it. There is no in betweens. You know, it's like you miss a meal, somebody else is going to feed you. No, with them, it's a do or die situation every day.
And he's wearing something that, you know, in some way it almost looks like a football helmet there, but a little more decorative. So what is that he's wearing that's covering his eyes?
It's a hood, and the hood came from the Middle Ages when the Europeans were on the Crusades. Arabs had been doing falconry for years, and they are the ones that invented the hood. So all the crusading knights took the idea and brought the hood back to Europe. And what it does is it blinds them and makes them think it's nighttime, so they'll be calm. So they feel like they're roosting. But it comes from the Middle Ages, from the Middle East. The Arab falconers fly a bird out of the hood. They'd put the hood on, and when they'd flush something, they would just take the hood off, and it would fly in a tail chase. And they were on horseback or camels, and the chase might go for miles.
Okay.
But in our country and in Europe with the closed country, that style, you just lose your bird every time you flew it. So that's when they developed the waiting on, the going up high and diving down. But you see their ability much better in the latter, the diving.
Yeah.
But that's called a hood.
Okay.
And this particular hood style is the Dutch hood. It's a 3-piece sewn. It's stitched together, and there's different variations of it. There's the Arab hoods. There's 3 pieces with that too, but normally it's just 1 piece, and it's stitched together. But
what's the material?
The material's leather.
A leather.
But the feathers, that's mallard and wood duck flank feathers that I don't think that bird caught, but another bird caught when I made that hood.
That's really neat.
So
so you made it.
Yeah,
you
I made the hood.
What are some of the examples that you brought that you've made? Are those some of the different types you were just mentioning, or
No,
these
are all
Dutch hoods.
Okay.
You know that you've got the each eye panel.
okay,
And this is the body, the centerpiece, and it's stitched that. And then there's also the piping or chin strap that's stitched on.
okay,
It's all very intricate. It takes lots of time and practice to make these things. But Harvey and I have been making them for about 2 years now, and we've gotten really, really good at
Well,
it.
Robert's better than me.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but
Now,
I'm retired, so I get to practice a lot. You know.
I see.
This hood, some of the hoods I make, and this
But he
hood,
does beautiful feathered plumes.
in the 1800s, a lot of hoods in Europe and in England were made with the eye panels being billiard cloth. So that's actually
Okay.
billiard cloth.
Is that right?
And this is
That's
actually
lizard.
lizard skin, and this is actually bullfrog skin.
Okay, so you've actually taken the skin of a frog and a
Laminated
lizard.
on the lizard. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really cool.
Well-
And Chip, I'm going to have to get some up close pictures of those you can provide on the video for those that might
yeah.
want to see it. Those are really neat.
I'm curious now, though. What would happen if you took his hood off? Not asking you to, but what
But
would happen?
I
if you-
will take it off somewhere in the program, and I'll hold him on the fist. He'll probably just sit and look around. If he did decide to bait, then I'd have the leash and I'd have control of him. But that brings up another thing that's interesting about falconry, in that there are phrases and words that we use every day that nobody knows comes from falconry.
Okay.
So we discussed earlier, if you feed the bird up, once you've fed him up, he's full, he won't come back. That's where the phrase, I am so fed up with this, comes from.
Yep.
When you hold the bird on your fist, the leash comes under your thumb. That's where the phrase, he's under my thumb. And then you wrap the excessive leash around your little finger. That's where the phrase, she's got him wrapped around her little finger, comes from.
Wow.
All falconry.
All from falconry.
From falconry.
Hoodwinked.
From falconry to a Rolling Stone song, Under My Thumb. Didn't they sing that?
Yep.
Hoodwink?
Hoodwinked is
Hoodwink,
also.
because when you hoodwink somebody, you've deceived them. You're deceiving him that it's night.
Okay.
All falconry related.
And most people don't
No.
know any of those phrases. Fed up is the one that's used quite a lot, but nobody knows it comes from this.
That really is fascinating. You know, it's one of those things too that there's probably people listening that didn't know we had people in Mississippi who were duck hunting with a falcon. Didn't even know that we had people doing that.
That's true. They're about, I don't know, 10 or 12 falconers, maybe 15 in the state, but Robert and I and one guy on the coast are the only ones that fly falcons. Okay. Everybody else flies short wings or red tails.
Okay.
So
it's easier because you have more, like I say, flying falcons is particularly to be successful at it, you have to have the game, you have to have the property and the time to do it, because with a hawk, it's not that it's not work and effort. It takes time. But, you go out in the woods, you got tons of trees, squirrels, and maybe the rabbits, but with a falcon and trying to set up these, and that's the other side of it. The orchestration to set up those flights to make everything go perfect can be kind of it's a lot to it.
I guarantee it sounds like it.
I'm thinking, how would I even start? I can't imagine being a dentist and.
Well, what if somebody wanted to start?
I'm cutting back, so I'm only working 3 days a week. I'm going to start cutting back. I'm getting to that age. Okay. But the flip side of it, we made it sound so difficult and so hard, and that's true. But the flip side of it is they don't require anywhere near the attention that a pet dog or cat would. They don't require water. They will get in a bath when the weather's warm and bathe, and they'll sometimes drink that. But basically, you feed them once a day, spend 10 minutes feeding them and caring for them, weighing them, and that's it. And then once they're trained, now the training is difficult, but once they're trained, you can drive out to your spot, have a flight within 10 minutes. If he catches a duck, you can be back home and watch, the football game.
Uh-huh.
So it's not like you go all day deer hunting or all day.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's easier.
Yeah. Yeah. The payoff is even maybe better in those ways.
Yeah. Once you
less overhead.
Once you get to that point, and you don't have to have special clothes. Uh-huh. We go out in the field just like we're dressed now for the most part.
Okay. How many falcons do you have?
I just have the one. He has two.
Okay.
I have a female, which we refer to. The female is referred to as the falcon. The male is always the tiercel, and tiercel means 1/3 less. It's a French word.
Okay.
And so in all birds of prey, the males are smaller. The females are the larger.
Yeah. And they don't really understand scientifically why that is, but they also think that because they're aggressive and they
nesting season. Probably.
and during nesting season they obviously mate, but the rest of the time of year they live solitary lives. They're not with a pair, will not stay together through the winter. So they think that the reason the male is smaller is if he was the same size or bigger than the female, that he would potentially kill the female in courtship displays and breeding. So, and these falcons, when they're nesting and the nestlings have hatched, he'll just deposit the food and leave.
Okay.
He doesn't, because the female gives him all kinds of grief. And so they think that's the reason that the males are smaller.
Yeah. For y'all, is there an element of also feeling like, doing this and having learned it, putting the time, participating in the sport, participating in falconry, that there's an element of preserving something historical at the same time as well,
Sure.
kind of not letting it pass away?
I feel that intensely. Yeah. There are not many. We have an apprentice in Oxford who's a younger fella, so we know at least through him it'll be carried on. But there are not many people wanting to do it. And, most sportsmen, I'm sure you know that they fish when it's fishing, and they go dove hunting in dove season, and they go deer hunting, and and as the season progresses, they change what they focus on. But once you've done this, like I said, I used to bird hunt a lot for woodcock and quail. Of course, there are not many quail anymore, but it's hard to do anything else. This is just too much fun, and.
It's almost a way of life.
Yeah.
It's
and preserving that history is important.
In fact, in Boise, they have the Archives of American Falconry. Have like a museum, but yeah, it's very addictive. I know when, like I said, I went to see my cousin in California, and he took us to his buddy's house that lived down the street, Palos Verdes, California. And he was a falconer too. And I knew a little bit about it. My cousin had been telling me. And we went to his friend's house, and he had a red-tailed hawk. He pulled that hawk out of the mew, which is the housing where the birds are kept, called a mew. And I was hooked in that moment. In that instant, I had to do it.
You kind of have to be. I had a Dan, the falconer we met in Missouri. He used to say that he didn't think falconers were made. He said they're born. You've got to be fascinated with birds of prey, and that's what gets you started.
Yeah, it's definitely a passion. It's unique. I like to look at falconry as it's almost like a specialized form of bird watching, but yet, it's that next level too, where you're interacting with a bird, you're handling the bird, you're participating, and you're working towards that goal in the hunting aspect of it, where you want this bird to cooperate. Basically, you're the bird dog, you're doing all the work, and it's just there ready to pull the trigger.
That's true.
To do what it does.
And also, in addition to the bird watching, there's been so many times that I've had the falcon down on a duck, and all of a sudden it would just freeze. It'd stop eating, and you think, well, what's wrong? And then look up, and you'd start looking up, and you'd see geese at like 1,500 feet going over, or a bald eagle way up there, that if he didn't direct you to where in the sky to look, you'd have never noticed.
Yeah.
And so you feel part of nature when you're doing this.
Oh yeah, for me, it's being outdoors, God's creation, and, that as a hunting partner, I mean, it just doesn't get any better, And Harvey and I, we've been doing it a long time. Actually, Harvey has permit number 1. I have permit number 2. We are the
For the whole
original.
state of Mississippi.
First
Is
two-
that right?
Back in 19, I'm going to tell the story. Back in 19, we had barely passed the falconry to be legalized in 76, but it passed in legislature in 77. We had been working to get it legalized here in the state. And back then they came out with the federal falconry regulations. You had to take a test. There were standards that you had to meet. Well, we all know who William Turcotte was, right? Bill Turcotte. And Harvey, and there was another guy, Tom
Whore.
we all drove down to Jackson in the old Mississippi Game and Fish Department. It was a high rise downtown, and we took the test in his office. There is a little room off his office, but yeah. And when we got through taking the test, he came out and graded it. We were all sitting in front of his desk. And he said, "Well, looks like y'all passed."
How about that?
Yeah.
What year was that again?
77.
77.
Yeah.
So,
So not quite, but getting close to 50 years ago.
A long time
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
of course, I was a pharmacist first and then went back to dental school. So there are periods of time where I didn't do it. But it's pretty ingrained in the way I want to experience the outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and falconry really is it's a hunting sport. It's, taking that bird and going out and hunting. It's not pet keeping. It's not, getting
And there
your
have
picture.
been falconers that, they trap a red tail and then they're so afraid of losing it, they don't really fly it.
Yeah.
They fly it to a lure and they tell their buddies how great they are that they have this hawk on their fist. Well, that's
Not falconry.
that's not falconry. If you're not willing to risk it, and you
Devote
can't
your
develop
time,
you
yeah.
can't develop the bird if you're not really pushing it to be as good as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they get there, you're getting the benefit of getting to watch it.
Yeah.
So it's like I tell people all the time, like we discussed earlier, they migrate through here. So peregrines kill things and dive at things in Mississippi. And how many people have seen it? Almost nobody.
Almost
And
nobody.
if you were to see a falcon flying, most people would think it's a crow.
Yeah.
They wouldn't recognize it. And so we're getting to see something that happens in the wild every day, right up close.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it a lot of fun.
That's really, really cool. It's such a neat thing. And it's so cool for me and Chip, too, to sit here a few feet from Toby.
Yeah,
And
we'll get the hood off and
see what we'll do that. We'll take a look at, get to see him eyeball to eyeball. But it's great to see y'all eyeball to eyeball, too.
Oh,
And,
well, this has
Thanks
been fun.
for having us, for sure.
yeah, thanks for driving down, sharing the story with us, and teaching us a little bit about it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Well,
And thank y'all for listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast, and we'll see you outdoors.